The Ice Age wind howls like a living thing. It claws at your skin, biting, cutting, whispering in your ears that you won't see another sunrise. You're standing on a snow-covered plain in what will one day be southern France, but right now, 30,000 years ago, it's a frozen battlefield between humans and nature. Your breath is a ghost in the air. You clutch a hide tighter around your shoulders. It smells faintly of smoke from last night's fire, and beneath that, of the reindeer it once was. This isn't fashion, this is survival. For the earliest humans, whether Homo sapiens in Ice Age Europe or Homo erectus under the blazing African sun, clothing wasn't about style, modesty, or even identity. It was the thin line between life and death. The birth of clothing anthropologists believe humans began wearing clothing somewhere between 100,000 and 170,000 years ago, most likely in Africa. We know this not from preserved hides which decay quickly, but from something much smaller, the human body louse. Unlike head lice, which live in hair, body lice live in clothing. Genetic studies show they split from head lice around 170,000 years ago, which means our ancestors had been wearing something against their skin for quite some time before that. The first clothes weren't tailored jackets or sewn tunics. They were likely animal skins, fur pelts, and plant fibers draped or tied around the body. Think of it as wrapping a blanket around yourself, but one made from the creature you hunted hours earlier. Materials of necessity. The climate shaped the wardrobe. In the colder Ice Age north, hides from mammoths, reindeer, and bison were essential. A mammoth hide could weigh over 100 kilograms, far too heavy to wear directly, but cut into sections and lined with softer furs, it became an almost impenetrable armor against the cold. In warmer regions such as Africa and Southeast Asia, early humans may have used bark cloth, a material made by pounding tree bark until it became thin, pliable, and soft. Archaeological evidence from 20,000 years ago in tropical regions shows the use of woven plant fibers, which allowed air to circulate while still protecting the skin from sunburn and insects. The tools to create. It's one thing to wrap yourself in a skin, it's another to turn that into wearable clothing. And here's where humanity's creativity began to show. The oldest known sewing needles, made of bone and ivory, date back 50,000 years. They've been found in Siberia, where a needle could mean the difference between surviving the winter or freezing to death. These needles were often less than 10 centimeters long, but sharpened to a fine point and drilled with a tiny hole to pull sinew, the fibrous tendon from animals, through the hide. It was slow, painstaking work, but the result was fitted clothing that hugged the body, trapped warmth, and allowed hunters to move more freely. Fire and fur clothing didn't exist in isolation. It worked in tandem with fire. Skins were smoked over the flames, which not only preserved them but softened the fibers, made them water resistant, and kept them from stiffening in the cold. The smell of smoke became as much a part of humanity's scent as sweat or blood. To a predator, it might have been a warning. To other humans, it was the smell of survival. The earliest style choices. Even at this early stage, there's evidence that clothing wasn't purely functional. At archaeological sites like Dolní Věstonice in the Czech Republic, dating back 30,000 years, figurines show people wearing decorated clothing, fringes, tassels, and patterned stitching. Why decorate a garment when survival is all that matters? Because even then, humans understood the power of appearance. A hunter with a cloak trimmed in wolf fur might have signaled strength, courage, or leadership. A shaman with feathers stitched into his sleeves might have been marked as a bridge between the human and the spirit world. A world without stores, every piece of clothing was handmade, hunted, skinned, scraped, sewn, and repaired until it fell apart. Nothing was wasted. The fur became coats, the sinew became thread, the bones became needles, the fat became waterproofing oil. When a garment finally reached the end of its life, it was often burned, the smoke carrying it back into the world from which it came. There were no fashion seasons, no brands, no shops, just the endless cycle of need and creation, dictated by the land, the weather, and the hunt. If you think clothing started in shopping malls, you're missing the real story. From survival hides to the first fashion statements, humanity's wardrobe tells us who we are, and in the next part, we'll uncover how cavemen's clothes became symbols of power, culture, and even beauty. Subscribe now so you don't miss the next chapter in this journey from skin to style. From necessity to identity, the blizzard has passed. Smoke from the fire curls lazily into the pale winter sky, and the reindeer hides drying on the rack flap gently in the wind. The clan gathers not just for warmth, but for something deeper, a ritual. A hunter kneels, threading a strip of red-dyed sinew through a thick wolf pelt. Another braids feathers into the fringe of a cloak. What began as pure survival has become something else. Identity. Clothing as language. Long before the first written word, clothing spoke for us. It told the story of who you were without needing to say a word. Anthropologists studying Ice Age societies have found evidence that the furs and decorations people wore signaled age, status, and skill. A cloak of fox fur might mark a skilled trapper. A necklace of carved bone could signal a healer or shaman. Even the cut and stitch of the clothing could identify which tribe you belonged to, not unlike the national dress of today. In some archaeological sites, such as Songhe, Russia, circa 30,000 years ago, the dead were buried in clothing that took hundreds of hours to make. One child was found wrapped in a tunic adorned with over 3,000 ivory beads, each carved by hand. This wasn't for warmth. This was a statement of love, status, and artistry. The first colours. We tend to imagine prehistoric clothing in dull browns and greys, but evidence suggests it wasn't so drab. Cavemen were chemists in their own right, using natural dyes from plants, minerals, and even insects to colour their garments. Red from ochre, yellow from clay or flowers, black from charcoal, blue from certain berries or minerals. Ochre in particular appears everywhere in early human history. It was smeared on bodies, painted on cave walls, and ground into powder to stain hides. In some African tribes, even today, ochre remains a symbol of strength, beauty, and protection from the sun. Tailoring without scissors. By 28,000 years ago, humans had developed an advanced understanding of tailoring. Bone needles became finer, awls were used to punch precise holes, and scrapers smoothed hides into flexible leather. The result? Clothing that wasn't just draped over the body, but shaped to fit it. These tailored garments allowed hunters to move swiftly without excess fabric, catching on branches, or restricting movement. In freezing climates, fitted sleeves and trousers trapped more heat than loose hides, reducing the risk of frostbite and hypothermia. This kind of innovation wasn't just comfort, it was survival evolution in action. Power in the pelts. A man wearing a bearskin had not just warmth, he had a story. To wear the hide of a predator meant you had faced it and lived. To wear the feathers of a rare bird meant you had the skill to catch it. Clothing became trophies, walking narratives of personal achievement. This was especially true for tribal leaders. Just as a modern general wears medals, a prehistoric chief wore the most prized furs, dyed the deepest colors, and adorned themselves with symbols of their conquests. Clothing became a visual form of respect and perhaps intimidation, the role of religion and ritual. In many ancient cultures, clothing was believed to have spiritual power. Shamans often wore cloaks covered in feathers, bones, or animal skulls to invoke the spirit of the animal during rituals. In caves such as Lascaux in France, dating to 17,000 years ago, wall paintings show human figures dressed in animal skins and horned headdresses, likely used in ceremonies to bless hunts or call on ancestral spirits. According to early religious beliefs, what you wore could shield you not only from the cold, but from evil spirits or misfortune. To wear the pelt of a powerful animal was to invite its spirit to protect and strengthen you. Gender, roles, and craft. While hunting was often a male-dominated task, clothing creation was largely the work of women, and it required extraordinary skill. From skinning and cleaning hides, to tanning them with animal fat and smoke, to sewing complex patterns. This was a full-time craft. Some anthropologists believe this division of labor was a key reason humans thrived over Neanderthals. Our ancestors could produce specialized, high-quality clothing that gave them an edge in harsher climates. Trade in threads. By the late Stone Age, clothing materials themselves became a form of currency. Tribes traded tanned hides, decorative shells, and dyed fibers across hundreds of miles. In some cases, items traveled farther than their owners ever did, carried through networks of trade routes long before roads existed. These exchanges not only spread materials, but styles. A hunter in Eastern Europe might wear a design that originated in the Middle East, without ever knowing its source. Clothing became part of a global human fingerprint, even before the first civilizations rose. Clothing is a timeline. From the first crude hides to tailored garments with intricate decoration, clothing tracks human progress. The more complex the clothing, the more it reflects not just the ability to survive, but the freedom to create, decorate, and express. By the end of the Ice Age, around 11,700 years ago, humans were wearing clothing that would still be recognizable today. Stitched shirts, trousers, shoes, albeit made from leather and fur instead of cotton or polyester. And each piece still carried the ancient memory of its purpose: to protect, to signal, to connect. We've gone from survival skins to power symbols, from rough hides to garments that tell a story. But the journey doesn't stop here in the final part. We'll uncover how the very clothes of cavemen influenced the rise of agriculture, settlement, and even early civilization fashion. Subscribe now, because the thread of history is still unspooling. The needle revolution and the birth of style. The morning air was cold, but not the bone-cracking cold of the Ice Age that had haunted earlier generations. This was a new world somewhere around 15,000 years ago. In some places, the glaciers had pulled back, rivers flowed stronger, grasslands opened, herds moved freely, and with them, so did the people. But something had changed about these people. If you looked closely, you'd notice their clothes no longer hung like stiff animal hide blankets. They clung to the body, shaping around shoulders, narrowing at the waist, tied neatly at the wrists and ankles. This was no accident. This was technology. The revolution had come not in the form of fire or stone blades, but in the quiet invention of the needle. Carved from bone, antler, or ivory and polished until smooth, these needles had an eye, a tiny drilled hole that could hold a length of sinew, plant fiber, or gut. It meant skins could be sewn together, not just tied. Seams could be tight, keeping out wind and rain. Clothes could be layered. Hoods could be attached. A hunter now wore leggings that allowed him to move silently through brush. A mother could swaddle her child in a fitted wrap instead of a loose skin. People were warmer, faster, more mobile. And with survival secured, creativity began to sneak in. Some groups discovered dyes, deep reds from ochre, yellows from lichen, browns from crushed walnut hulls, even purples from certain mollusks. Others stitched shells, beads, and carved bone ornaments into their clothing. The clothes told a story: who you were, where you came from, what you could do. Among some tribes, you could tell a shaman at a glance. His cloak might be covered in feathers from birds no one else dared to hunt, or painted with spirals and handprints believed to protect the wearer from spirits. Hunters might sew the claws or teeth of their greatest kills into their coats, not just as trophies, but as talismans of luck. By now, clothing wasn't just protection. It was communication. If you were skilled with your hands, your tribe's best tailor, you had status. If you could trade rare dyes or beautifully tanned hides with a neighboring group, you had wealth. Clothing became a currency traded across rivers, deserts, and forests long before coins ever existed. Archaeologists have found needles in Siberia over 30,000 years old, the oldest known sewing tools. In Israel's Ohalo II site, impressions of woven fibers over 19,000 years old show early humans were already twisting plant fibers into threads. In the caves of France, ochre-stained hide scraps suggest entire garments may have been decorated for beauty as much as for function. It's here, in this age of needles and dyes, that we can see the very first hint of something that would one day dominate the human story: fashion. And it's worth remembering, every shirt you put on today, every jacket, every pair of jeans has an ancestor in the quiet work of a caveman sitting by the fire, sewing hide to hide, one stitch at a time. Subscribe now if you want to know how these same skills eventually turned cavemen into the first tailors of history, and how those tailors shaped the earliest civilizations. From survival to symbol, the legacy of caveman clothing. The firelight flickered over a group gathered inside a rock shelter. Outside, the wind howled across the plains. But inside, the people were warm not just because of the fire, but because of what they wore. Heavy cloaks of fur lined with soft inner hide, stitched trousers that hugged the legs, boots stuffed with dry grass for insulation. Clothing, once nothing more than a barrier against cold, had now become a defining part of who they were. It told a stranger whether you were a hunter or a healer, whether you came from the forest or the mountains, whether you were part of this tribe or another. When agriculture began to spread around 10,000 years ago in regions like the Fertile Crescent, clothing evolved with it. People no longer followed herds endlessly. They settled. They grew plants, domesticated animals, and discovered they could shear wool, spin fibers, and weave cloth. The days of exclusively wearing skins were fading. Wool, flax, and later cotton entered the human wardrobe. Weaving looms emerged. A single weaver could now produce patterns, geometric designs, stripes, borders that carried cultural meaning. A person's tunic might display symbols of their gods or patterns passed down for generations. According to many religious traditions, clothing was more than physical protection. In the book of Genesis, garments are given to Adam and Eve after their expulsion from Eden, a sign of both modesty and the human shift into a new stage of life. In ancient Hindu texts, the dhoti and sari are described not just as garments, but as expressions of purity and spiritual order. Among some Native American traditions, animal hide garments were blessed in ceremonies before hunting or war. Clothing became a bridge between the physical and the spiritual. And yet, throughout all this change, something persisted from those earliest cavemen: the idea that what we wear is a language without words, a language that tells stories. The Inuits' fur-lined parkas spoke of survival in the Arctic's deadly chill. The Maasai's red shuka told of bravery and identity in East Africa's plains. The feathers in a chief's headdress carried the weight of victories and alliances, and today, even in the neon glow of 2025 cities, what you wear still sends signals of status, belonging, rebellion, or individuality. From a strip of hide draped over the shoulders to a hand-stitched ceremonial robe, clothing has always been a mirror of our needs, our creativity, and our beliefs. It's not just fabric and thread, it's history you can touch. So next time you zip a jacket or lace a boot, remember, you are part of a chain stretching tens of thousands of years into the past. A chain that began with a shivering figure wrapping a hide around their shoulders and became the vast, colourful, and symbolic wardrobe of humanity. And if you want to keep walking through that chain of human history, from cavemen to kings, from hunters to high fashion, make sure you're subscribed. Because in our next journey, we'll explore the first humans who dared to leave the land entirely and sailed into the unknown.